There is a famous quote, allegedly attributed to Mark Twain, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Given the title of this video, me starting it off by bringing that quote up is a bit ironic, but that's because irony is the concept of today's video. The idea that sometimes you can do seemingly everything right, yet still fail. This couldn't be more fitting than with the short-lived, tragic story of the beloved app once known as Vine. The very simplistic video sharing platform where viewers could scroll down to watch random clips that were never more than 6 seconds long. Compared to its much bigger cousin YouTube, it was an incredibly simplistic and quick way of retrieving information and entertainment. Sound familiar? TikTok, a short-form video app, has faced an undetermined fate within the United States. It was banned, then 14 hours later, it was unbanned, and now it might be banned again. With Vine, in many respects, being essentially a precursor to TikTok, it's hard not to notice the parallels. Because of course, despite its immense, unstoppable popularity, Vine also met its unexpected demise. But the reasons for TikTok's potential ban are much more political, whereas for Vine's complete downfall, it was much more practical. And I think that this is a distinction that shows a great disconnect between TikTok and Vine and the audience they were serving in their respective times. I will admit, I have never used TikTok. I've never downloaded TikTok. I barely know anything about the platform. So researching this was a bit of a challenge because I had to go into it completely blind. But it was quite fascinating. The things that killed Vine were both within and beyond its control, and in retrospect, provide apparent reasons for why this insanely popular app came tumbling down. So what happened to Vine, and what kind of similarities does this app's story share with TikTok today? It all starts in 2012, and the internet is in a very interesting transitional stage. Online infrastructure has finally mass adapted to providing near universal support for video sharing sites, such as YouTube, where users can basically upload as much as they want, whenever they want. The site is only rapidly growing and showing no signs of stopping. It feels like it's finally reaching the point where the possibilities are endless, so might as well start taking advantage of it, and perhaps taking the concept of online video to other formats and avenues. This was especially relevant during the huge rise of smartphones. They were quickly surpassing traditional desktop and laptop PCs in terms of market share, and on top of that, the computing experience itself was changing. People behave differently when using a smartphone than they do with a traditional PC, and their wants and needs are often different as well. People's attention spans are much more undivided when they are on a laptop or desktop computer compared to a smartphone, which is often much more short-term and for receiving information on the go. This meant that video entertainment that was primarily intended for smartphones didn't have to be nearly as sophisticated, and given the new landscape, mobile video editing software was lacking. Yes, there were apps like iMovie for iPhone, but they just weren't as efficient or even easy to use. Well, that's when Russ Yusupov, Don Hoffman, and Colin Kroll took on a whole new market. They were working for a travel agency known as Jetsetter, and decided to create a video editor for the iPhone. It wasn't anything close to sophisticated, but it allowed for users to film and share casual moments in life from a much more controlled and flexible environment. But there were problems. Smartphones at this time had much smaller storage than regular PCs, so video files took up much more real estate. The best way to combat this would be to make the video durations much shorter. They experimented with 10 seconds, but it felt too long. Then they changed it to 5 seconds, but it felt too short. So they decided on a very unique number, 6 seconds. For whatever reason, making it a second longer felt just right, where it wasn't too short, where the point of the video was lost, but also not too long to bore someone or have the video grow in file size. It also made it very easy to save to the phone's camera roll and to send the videos through text. The app was designed to be a much more organized version of the videos in your camera roll, emphasizing clips that were more creative, yet still candid. Instead of a grid system, users would just continuously scroll down, much like a long Vine. In fact, that's what they decided to call the app, Vine Labs. the developers released a beta version of the app to a select group of people, including their friends and family, and it was incredibly well received. The convenience and design of the app incentivized users to create consistent content that they could then share with their friends, much like a social network. This caught the attention of Twitter. Being a website designed for short-form text-based content where users were limited to 140 characters, the concept of a short-form video service seemed very fitting. It was also much easier to host all these videos because of their short length. So in October of 2012, Twitter bought the company for $30 million. And then in January of 2013, Vine, as we knew it, officially launched to the public.
You know what's great about the internet? Is all the bountiful knowledge that we have the privilege of accessing. I'll tell you what's great about the internet. Finding a hot girl. Like this one website, Squarespace. Like this one chick, Veronica. It's this website builder for both beginners and experts that is super easy to use, and it's all in one place. I found her on this dating site, she speaks French, and she can tie a knot in a cherry stem. They have something called design intelligence, right? It takes 2 decades of web design trends and provides you a template which you can then customize yourself. We went to see this foreign film, Le Petit Fromage, and she's quoting the whole thing back to back in the movie theater. And when I'm done, all I have to do is type in my domain name, and then it's live on the net. Then in the middle of the movie, she puts down her popcorn, and we just start making out. I can even add a payment portal to my website where people can buy things with currency. Currency! But then the movie had a tragic ending and she starts crying. I guess I learned something from that movie. There is one thing I learned about Squarespace. Should really be nicer to my brother Tosh. People can now find my page on German polka history. So I bugged his website with sound effects. Rapid firecrackers. You know, there's this new technology called Adobe Flash that I was thinking of adding to my page. It creates a sort of... Oh, come on. I also fixed his lamp. Oh, man. It's all over my laptop and my books.
Oh, she's calling me now.
Veronica. Oh, you are? What flavor? Yeah, sounds good. I'll be right down. Ah, I love juice.
Vine quickly proved to have a lot of potential, and it quickly took off. It was a new, refreshing format of video entertainment that paved the way for people to find new creative ways of capturing the world's devoted attention in just the span of 6 seconds. Also keep in mind that this is around the time where the internet is really developing a sense of self-identity and culture, which allowed for Vine to basically become a factory for new memes and inside jokes. It was even used for more serious real-world things with trends like the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which was meant to spread awareness for those inflicted with the disease. Vine was now #1 in the App Store, and by August of 2013, had 40 million users. Soon after, other platforms started emulating its setup, such as Instagram, which introduced a 15-second limit on videos. As people were already accustomed to this format by then, they were able to get away with the slightly longer duration. With its addictive design and space-efficient setup, you would think that an app like Vine would just be a recipe for success. The videos were so short, so they didn't take up nearly as much space as something like YouTube, which often hosted individual videos that were hours long. On top of that, view duration of the content was super high, because 6 seconds just isn't enough time for someone to get bored. It was a home run. However, there soon ended up being a lot of problems that weren't immediately noticeable, many of which, admittedly, were quite preventable. Arguably the biggest component of this was their lack of strategy and long-term planning. Like most products, Vine started in its experimental phases, but it kind of stayed there. This is understandable given that Vine was pretty much the first of its kind, and the only way that a business can continue existing is, of course, through making money. Yes, Vine absolutely had the advantage of saving a ton on storage space because of their short video format, but this does quickly add up over time, especially when you become the fastest growing app in history at that time. It especially adds up when your server space and cache reserves is only a fraction of something like Google. When you consider these factors, it's really not that much better off. This also gave them a great disadvantage: lack of advertising. If you remember, Vine did not have ads on its app at all. Now this sounds like a good thing because hey, who wants to watch ads? But this was the kiss of death, and it was mostly a consequence of business myopia. How do you put ads on videos that are only 6 seconds long? The ads would be longer than the video itself. It would completely defeat the purpose. Yes, there's always static ads, but those don't pay nearly as much and would barely offset all these hosting costs. Their presence would just not be a worthy trade-off of users potentially steering away from the app. There were sponsor deals that both the app and creators would do to make money, but even then, a business is going to spend much less for a 6-second ad than they are for a 90-second segment on YouTube. And on top of that, there isn't really a way to organically incorporate an ad into a 6-second video. The opportunity to find a solution to these problems only waned with Vine's lack of leadership. The higher-ups of the company experienced very high turnover. They kept getting replaced with person after person, and the original founders were eventually out of the picture entirely. Each replacement had a different vision for the company, and one of them ended up laying off over 300 employees. The company had no sense of direction, and because of that, there wasn't really much indication that these problems would be resolved the way they were supposed to, which in of itself created a new problem. The talent started leaving. All these creators that accrued massive audiences on Vine could now afford to take their viewers with them to other platforms like YouTube, where they could take longer sponsorship deals and make Google AdSense revenue. They did this after repeatedly trying to work with Vine on some kind of monetization deals, but alas, they got nothing. Many of these creators still stayed on Vine, but they were on there nearly as much, and so it really became more of a secondary social media platform for them over anything. Instagram's adoption of short-form content only hurt them more, because Instagram could afford to make this change, since they were already making so much money from other features they had. Vine's support from Twitter was just very lackluster, and so as this trend continued, the company continued to suffer, and in 2016 announced that they would be shutting down indefinitely in January of 2017. Rust Yusupov tweeted 4 words: "Don't sell your company." One of the founders of Vine then started to work on a replacement app called Byte, but it was overshadowed by a new rising app called TikTok. TikTok's popularity exploded during lockdown, when people were stuck in their houses and had nothing better to do, and it was able to both directly and indirectly learn from the mistakes that Vine made. TikTok supported short-form content that was still long enough to incorporate effective advertising and even provide decent income for its creators. Additionally, TikTok implemented way more hands-on, innovative, and easy-to-use tools to really spice your video up and make it well-edited, all from your phone. Vine was really just stuff that was recorded directly off your phone. TikTok's incorporation of music also allowed them to put together royalty agreements with musicians that acted as another source of income. Lastly, arguably the biggest thing that allowed TikTok to explode was its algorithm. You don't find the videos find you. Obviously, there is an option to explore certain topics if you want to, but the primary purpose of the app is for a certain niche of videos to be curated for you as you watch them and swipe the screen. The time and engagement you allot to each video is taken into account to put this algorithm together. This effectively eliminates something known as choice paralysis, where there are too many options to choose from, where you don't even know where to start. This was especially beneficial during the pandemic, where people were often already so low energy from being locked in the house all day. Using the TikTok app at face value doesn't really require much thinking. You just swipe. This is a big reason why there's that cruel stereotype that people who use TikTok are dumb and don't think about things, because it's an app that frankly doesn't require you to think by design. It's quite brilliant. As TikTok further grew its massive audience, it was able to afford to make their videos longer, and now, with a video limit of 60 minutes, we may even see it compete directly with something like YouTube. The main challenge it's facing right now is its potential ban in the US, but the reasons for this are mostly political. Whereas for Vine, it was budgetary and practical. That's where the rhyming comes into play. But there are certainly instances of history repeating itself between Vine and TikTok in this regard. For one, competing platforms like YouTube and Instagram introducing things like Shorts and Reels may take viewership away from the app, especially since these platforms aren't facing risk of a ban. This is much like what Vine experienced all those years ago. Much like Vine, it also took TikTok a long time to really establish an identity for itself. It started off almost like a sister company of an app it acquired called Musical.ly, which was an app where people would basically lip sync to popular songs. Not exactly that exciting. It then started to over-diversify into things like shopping, live streams, long-form content. Luckily, their audience was already big and loyal enough for these decisions to work, but there was a bit of uncertainty for some time. Vine had a very promising start. For its time, it seemed that it was doing everything that it was supposed to, yet it still didn't work. But the irony is that they actually didn't do everything right, because if they had, they wouldn't have failed to begin with. It's just that it appeared that way. The reasons were just not immediately apparent. The timing for Vine just wasn't right. And this is especially the case when you consider things like Moore's Law. Now, I discussed Moore's Law in my video about YouTube running out of space, but I feel like my explanation could be refined just a little bit more. In short, Moore's Law is the idea that the amount of transistors on a circuit doubles every 2 years, thus making computers more powerful and even cheaper. 128 gigabytes of storage costs much cheaper now than it did, say, back in the early 2000s. While Moore's Law doesn't apply as much to storage on hard disk drives, it does apply much more to SSD storage, which has become significantly more popular over the years. It is quite a controversial subject, because there's a lot of debate on if it will even have any more validity in the foreseeable future. You see, Moore's Law does have a limit, thanks to physics, and we may just reach that limit very soon. But even once this limit is reached, companies like Google still have quite some time before all their space fills up. And even then, they could always build more data centers that could increase their capacity just by increasing the amount of servers that they own. Earth still has plenty of open real estate to build more of these facilities. This alone may outpace the demand of a mammoth site like YouTube. Truthfully, Google should be more worried about the amount of energy this would use, rather than running out of storage. However, Google has placed a huge emphasis on using renewable energy over the last couple decades. So hopefully, this can also become less of an issue over time. Vine, back in the early to mid-2010s, had to rely on infrastructure that was much more expensive to operate than it is now because of Moore's Law. And therefore, the storage problem did pose much more of a challenge, and Vine just didn't have the capital that Google has to operate the company as a loss leader. So the entire project just failed. TikTok has the advantage of targeting an audience already familiar with a concept like Vine, as well as better technology for lower prices. Vine walked so TikTok could run. So, will we see history repeat? We already have in many respects. But let's hope that we continue making the right decisions so that we can learn from our past. If you want to learn about how YouTube is able to host so many videos, I have done a video about that, which you can check out here. A special thanks to all my Patreon supporters down below, patreon.com/nationsquid. You can also buy me a coffee if you're oh so inclined. Thank you for watching, everybody.